alive! You heard him? Stop.
You make the move. It's your move.
In case I don't see you. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
I'm sorry, but I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business.
Very well, little brother. Very well.
What is it about the movies that compels so many people? For over 100 years now, we've been continuously fascinated by the power and emotion of the screen. We've seen tastes change, technology develop, and experimentation on what makes a film a film. And that's exactly what I'd like to discuss. Movies have been a big part of my life since the days I could use a VHS player at 6 years old, watching all those Disney movies. As a filmmaker and a film enthusiast, my mind is just clogged with film terminology, quotes, images, and the names of directors worldwide. This film will be split into 4 parts, each looking at a different block of cinema, starting with the birth of the medium to now. One could talk for hours upon hours about this colossal medium, even though it's quite young. So if you do notice that there are some key films left out or significant movements, it's because we just don't have time, and this is my journey. For those who already have a vast knowledge of film, I hope it stimulates your opinions you already have. And for those that haven't, and they're new to the medium, I hope this encourages you to explore. Now, everyone, I think that is what is the most exciting part of cinema. So, let's begin. Sit back and enjoy. Where do we begin? When studying and researching the inception of film, one tends to look at photography first. Skipping over that stone, let's jump straight to film. It seems that there was not one set technology, but multiple around the same period that eventually became what we know as celluloid film. The names we are focused with are Thomas Edison, George Eastman, Etienne Marey, and the Lumiere brothers, Louis and Auguste Lumiere. The history is a little complicated, so let's keep it simple. George Eastman, known for founding the Eastman Kodak Company, patented the roll film in 1888 for photography, which was a thin and flexible material for photographs. In the same year, Etienne Marey builds a box-type moving picture camera which uses an intermittent mechanism and strips of paper film. Again in 1888, Thomas Edison began trying to invent machines to apply film and eventually created the kinetograph in 1891, after seeing what Eastman and Marey had produced. By 1893, Edison had set up a studio with William Dixon to begin making films. Louis and Auguste Lumiere, also known as the Lumiere brothers, in 1894 designed a camera called the cinematograph, which uses flexible film cut to 35mm in width, shooting at 16 frames per second, which did become the standard for 25 years. In 1895, the Lumiere brothers shot their first film, which was this. Then, more famously in 1896, they shot this. They became renowned, exhibiting around the world. At this point, we have different cameras and different experiments, and just seeing what people filmed is fascinating. Here are some films shot by Dixon using the kinetograph. Sandow, a bodybuilder of the time. Blacksmiths hitting an anvil. Cinema at this point was simply a novelty, a carnival-like attraction. It was such magic to see movement. It was motion pictures. But it was when the idea of narrative came along, film was about to become more than a carnival attraction. In 1902, we had this. One of the most famous icons of early cinema. It's a fantasy story, and when I watched it at the age of 16, being new to silent film, I was stunned. The imagination and adventure seen here is no different from where film has tried to go since. Georges Méliès was truly a magician. He created hundreds of films toying with what could be done with this new technology, creating illusions and tricks that are still commonly used today. Many of his films unfortunately were destroyed during World War I when the French army melted the celluloid film. The number was over 400 original prints. This became heels for shoes. Then, in the United States, we had Edwin Porter, who made this, the first Western film. Both A Trip to the Moon and The Great Train Robbery display how film began to tell stories. The most significant figure of narrative cinema, of course, is D.W. Griffith. Starting as an extra in early films, he would soon go on to direct his first short in 1908. The stories he explored became complex, looking at the mind, politics, and social issues. When we look at his most controversial film, The Birth of a Nation, this becomes apparent. A 3-hour film looking at the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, demonizing African American people. This was truly a bold step. A year later, being inspired by the Italian epic Cabiria, he made Intolerance, which told 4 stories intertwined. It was the most expensive film ever made to this point, with mammoth sets and over 3,000 extras. Although it was initially a flop, it would gain recognition in later years. Now cinema was truly developing. The silent era dawned many great geniuses of comedy, and it is an area that I really enjoyed exploring. My focus will be the 3 geniuses of silent comedy: Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, and Harold Lloyd. Chaplin joined the Fred Corner Theatre Group in 1906 at the age of 17. In 1914 he was spotted by Mike Sennett, owner of the Keystone Comedy Group. By the end of that year, he became the highest paid star ever in the industry. He quickly garnered control as director, and he still wasn't satisfied. This led to moving to different companies over the next decade. Chaplin became a worldwide icon, and his cramp character became one of the most recognised figures of cinema. The first silent film I ever watched was Chaplin's The Kid, and to this day it is one of my most beloved favourites. I was overwhelmed by the emotion on screen, and how without words so much was communicated. Making it more poignant is how the film represented a deep sadness in Chaplin's own personal life, the death of his newborn child in 1919. Discovering the young Jackie Coogan, he was inspired and made what is known as the first slapstick feature film. This is also the first time anyone had truly combined this comedy with serious drama. To me, this shows cinema beginning to mature emotionally. It tackles parenthood and poverty in a way that had not been done before, combining it with slapstick humour. The work of Chaplin is one of the greatest contributions to the roots of film, and has been one of my major influences since I discovered him. Keaton came from a vaudeville background, whose first appearance in film was as a co-star with Fatty Arbuckle in 1917, leading to appearing in 14 of his shorts. It was in 1920 when he was given his own unit to create 2 reeler comedies. Cops is one of them, and it is among his most well known, where we see him being chased by literally hundreds of policemen. Like Chaplin, Keaton displayed great comedic timing, but also had something quite different. His style was more athletic, and most notably, his face was deadpan. This became Keaton's unique style, as he went on to make excellent comedies such as Sherlock Jr. and The General. Harold Lloyd, who is not as recognised as the other 2, is still an important figure. In Safety Last, we get one of the most thrilling films of the period. The stories behind the making of this film make it all the more impressive. There are no safety nets, and this is a real building. Still not impressed? In 1919, during a publicity shoot, a bomb mistaken for a prop exploded, leading to Lloyd losing his thumb and index finger. What Lloyd did here is show a cinema of thrills. This influenced both Chaplin and Keaton, and it's so apparent when we look at Chaplin's The Gold Rush in 1925, when we see an entire cabin seesawing on a cliff. Then in Keaton's The General, when he is at the front of a train removing what gets in the way. Silent comedy is one of the most fascinating parts of film history for me. They still make people laugh all these years later. They are timeless. Across the early years of film, there were several different movements across Europe, while the US continued to dominate foreign markets. Out of all the movements, the one I wish to primarily focus on is German Expressionism and also Soviet montage. For me, these are the most significant. What makes German Expressionism so fascinating is just how much it contributed to how films are constructed. Expressionism placed a focus on exaggerated mise-en-scène, lighting, facial expressions and body movement. Everything in the frame became a device to tell a story. That is exactly what we see in a scene like this. The room is darkly silhouetted and the space is tall. The door and window frames are large and crooked. All of this creates a very unsettling image, and with the woman sleeping, quickly we do fear for her safety as Césaire slowly walks towards her. Caligari went on to influence Hollywood, and this can be seen in James Whale's Frankenstein, but more on that later. Of course today we can see all these sharply pointed sets as artificial, but to me, it creates a really otherworldly atmosphere that is both unnerving and eerie. Not to mention the fact that it has a plot twist, making you reflect on the whole film. Another one of my favourite expressionist films is from the great Fritz Lang. In his epic Metropolis, we have seen just how striking cinema could be so early on. I was totally floored by the grand architecture, the massive sets when discovering this film. Full of political allegory, biblical messages, and comments on technology, it is one of the most thrilling films of the silent era. Metropolis is one of the most influential films of all time. Its architecture would be an influence for Ridley Scott in Blade Runner. The robot of the film would go on to inspire the design of Star Wars C-3PO. Metropolis was the most expensive film made in Germany, almost causing the production company to go bankrupt. Fritz Lang had an excellent career in Germany, making not one but 3 epics. Alongside this, he had The Woman in the Moon, and a 2-part film, Die Nibelungen. The Woman in the Moon is about space travel, and I couldn't help but feel an element of it is in homage to A Trip to the Moon. Die Nibelungen is a fantasy story based on the epic poem of the same name. The scale of this film is huge. In this scene, our hero Siegfried battles a dragon. Today this does look really fake, but somehow breathtaking. The dragon is a true technical achievement, and it took several people to operate it. Clocking in at 5 hours, it is a massive story that is full of drama and action, and does sit among my favourite films of all time. Meanwhile, in the USSR, we had the movement of Soviet montage, a movement responsible for a new way of editing. The idea of montage begins with Lev Kuleshov sometime in the 1910s. Kuleshov demonstrated how it is through editing that shots create meaning. He believed in how 2 shots can create a third idea, which is best explained in this sequence. This really taps into the subjectivity of film. Using the exact same shot, the meaning changes with what follows. A plus B equals C. Alfred Hitchcock much later explains the same thing.
It can be changed to create a different idea. Now we have a close-up. Let me show what he sees. Let's assume he saw a woman holding a baby in her arms. Now we cut back to his reaction to what he sees. And he smiles. Now what is he as a character? He's a kindly man. He's sympathetic. Now, let's take the middle piece of film away, the woman with the child, but leave his 2 pieces of film as they were. Now we'll put in a piece of film of a girl in a bikini. He looks, girl in a bikini, he smiles. What is he now? The dirty old man.
One film that always sticks out for me is The Man with the Movie Camera. The film uses every technique available at the time, including freeze frames, crossfades, slow motion, and even shots blending, melting into one another. It is 1928, and already Dziga Vertov has made a film aware of itself. His intention was to create a cinematic language without words or title cards, and that is exactly what we get. The film shows a day in the life of the USSR, but to me has a universal approach, such as in sequences like this. We are seeing mass production, assembly line, factory work. These people take on the traits of machines, which Vertov shows us by juxtaposing between shots of workers and machines. With an average shot length of 2.4 seconds, it is a hypnotizing experience. With all the great art cinema around the world, Hollywood dominated foreign markets, making more films than any other country. In 1928, the Academy Awards was introduced, with the film Wings being the very first Best Picture winner in 1928. The film was a technical achievement with gritty war sequences, but more impressively aerial shots. At this point, Hollywood was at the height of their game, but their style was deeply influenced by European cinema. Both Fritz Lang and F.W. Murnau came to Hollywood to further their careers. Lang went on to make many noir films, and Murnau, although dying in 1931, made 2 films in the States, one of which is Sunrise. This is another silent film I discovered early on, and it had me in tears. The expressionist cinematography and lighting, combined with its profoundly human story, make it one of the greatest films of the period and of all time. A husband and father from the quiet countryside is tempted by a city girl to kill his wife and come live in the city with her. He is tempted by the modern life of nightclubs, dancing, jazz and skyscrapers. And it is in this age of jazz that cinema was about to change forever. The invention of sound was about to totally revolutionize the industry. The sound era was one of the areas of film that really inspired me to start watching films from all these different countries. I was overwhelmed by how moving, shocking, and thought-provoking these films could really be, even 75 years later, and yet they still relate to the human condition and life itself. The official ending of the sound era is said to be 1931. That is where we begin to dive into the next chapter of film. In 1927, The Jazz Singer was released, making it the first feature-length film to include synchronized sound. The audiences enjoyed it, but it did make studio executives anxious. Some said it would just be a novelty. This change in the medium meant a new way of conveying meaning and style of acting, which many sound stars did not transition to well. Most importantly, it created a technical challenge. For the first few years, studios had a hard time adjusting. Directors had to be inventive in order to use the new technology and overcome its problems. The audio equipment was clunky and large, and would also pick up the sound of loud cameras that are operating, causing them to do things such as placing cameras in booths. Camera movement became more static. However, some filmmakers became inventive in how to use sound, both physically and aesthetically. In Hitchcock's Black Mail, sound steps in for someone screaming, and in another scene captures the inner thoughts of a character.
Be careful of a knife. You come up against a knife. I'm in Chelsea. You mustn't use a knife.
Sound also brought Disney's beloved Mickey Mouse to the screen, where sound is used rhythmically. I always love watching these old Disney cartoons, and some of them should be seen as short films. They tell stories, and they are incredibly inventive with the use of sound effects and music. Another fantastic use of sound is the film M, where sound and silence are used to tell the story. In a scene like this, we see the use of shadows and the sound of Laurie whistling, adding absolute suspense. The 30s was a glorious period for Hollywood. We had the rise of the gangster genre with the Big Three, The Public Enemy, Little Caesar, and Scarface. We also saw the horror genre form more fully. It was my discovery of these early horror films that began to spark my interest in cinema truly when I was around 14 or so. It made me realise how fascinating old movies could be. I started with Frankenstein and was overwhelmed by its imagery, sounds, and story. As I had said before, German Expressionism greatly influenced Hollywood, and I think it is best displayed here. The style resembles films like Caligari very much. I had also seen The Bride of Frankenstein, which many say is greater than its predecessor is. It is a dark comedy almost mocking of the monster, but more importantly, makes us see the monster in a much different light. We sympathise with him.
She hates me.
He represents the dangers of playing God, and that some things should just be left alone.
We belong dead.
Another one of my favourites is The Invisible Man, based on the H.G. Wells novel.
nuts and May. Here we go gathering nuts. Struggling chemist.
I was just so captivated by Claude Rains' powerful voice, which truly led the performance, since we never do see his face. The moment he arrives at the end is such an excellent character introduction. It is full of mystery and menace. It is an excellent sci-fi horror film exploring the dangers of man's desire to progress, a dominant theme in literature and cinema even now. Similar to the theme of representing the future, one of the greatest and most understated films from the classic Hollywood period is Leo McCarey's Make Way for Tomorrow. It is the story of an old couple who have been thrown out of their house, forcing their children to take care of them, but none of them seem to have the time or space. This causes both of them to stay with different children, miles apart from each other. As its opening informs us, this is a story about the gap between the young and the old. However, it's more than that. It is a story about the modern world with its fast cars, loud music, nightlife and new technology. It is such a profoundly human story with some of the most heart-wrenching performances in all of cinema.
I'm sorry.
The closing of the 1930s saw what is one of the greatest years in film. Hollywood's movies got bigger, and so did their audience. In 1939, we saw some of the most iconic films in cinema history. The Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind, Stagecoach, and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Everybody has seen The Wizard of Oz, and I think it needs not be discussed. So let's take a look at Gone with the Wind. What can I say? It's an epic. Thousands of extras, massive sets, and a love story that stands as one of the most iconic in all film. According to inflation, it still remains the highest grossing film of all time. In retrospective today, it has a level of controversy over its representation of slavery and African Americans. Avoiding politics here, Gone with the Wind really is an epic romance story, with a highly flawed protagonist. We see Scarlett's manipulation and selfishness start to finish. Clark Gable plays one of the most iconic characters of all time, with his closing line of,
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
I think the film has some flaws and I don't see it as an absolute masterpiece, but it remains an important film. So it is the World War II period, with America just stepping in to join the fight in 1941. The war would have an impact during and after. In 1940, Chaplin makes his first full-sound film. It is here he truly speaks out.
I'm sorry, but I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business.
A Jewish man who serviced in the war loses his memory and returns to his home in the fictional Tomania, a parody of course of Germany. With no recollection of what has happened, he finds himself getting mixed up with the dictator, Adenoid Henkel, and his regime.
Das trifft das Sauerkraut mit der Juden. Der Leberwurst mit der Juden.
Chaplin had true courage to make a work like this, and for its time it is unparalleled. It was Chaplin's most successful film financially, even if censors in the industry were concerned for its political content. It is hard for me to articulate and express the impact this film had on me, and my level of appreciation for it. It is perhaps Chaplin's most profoundly human work, with its closing speech summing up the hate and intolerance in the world. The slapstick humour is outrageously funny, and the level of satire for its time is daring and unflinching. Coming out a year later would be one of the most bold directorial debuts, Citizen Kane by Orson Welles, who was only at the age of 26. Having seen it at 16, it was my favourite film of all time for quite a while. It was a film of ensemble talent from the producers, the actors, musicians, and, of course, the cinematographer. Studying it in my first year of film studies, I realised just how impressive its use of the camera was. The composition, the noir-like lighting, the deep focus cinematography, the list goes on. And on top of that we have the monumental performances and story of politics and social commentary. It's an attack on capitalism and the news industry that can arguably be said to have more relevance today. The same can be said for my favourite John Ford film, The Grapes of Wrath, adapted from the John Steinbeck novel. Like Make Way for Tomorrow, this is a testament to the transition to modernity. The performances and story of this film is deeply sad, but full of importance. One of the early scenes of the film that sticks with me most is this scene. It just made me tear up instantly. Ford gives us so much information in this moment. As she looks in the mirror, we see her reminiscing of the home she has always lived in. The earrings she holds up are not only making her think of a time when she was younger, but the past in general. Her old life that is now about to change. If this isn't great cinema and storytelling, then I really don't know what is. As the war raged on, a new genre rose in Hollywood. That, of course, was film noir. Many historians see noir as a reaction to the war and its horrors, a level of pessimism coming from the tragic loss of life. Furthermore, it is about the enemy in the shadows. The enemy of war, perhaps. There are many great noir films to talk about from the 1940s. The Maltese Falcon, The Big Sleep, Scarlet Letter, White Heat. But the one that strikes me the most is Billy Wilder's Double Indemnity. The film is daring for its time, riding its way through censorship. Double Indemnity is a dark, sexually charged thriller that gives you a very pessimistic view of the world. A world where there is only lies, greed, lust and deceit. The film has a powerful use of lighting that adds so much to the character's deception as well as setting the film's tone. This would be one of the key films in noir, which we will see much more later in the 1950s. But before getting into that, let's take a look at something else. In the 1940s, British-born Alfred Hitchcock was already a well-established director, known for his masterful use of the camera and stories of suspense. In the 1940s, he had two big experiments, Lifeboat and Rope. Rope was one of the first Hitchcock films I was exposed to, and I found it deeply thrilling. What Hitchcock wanted to achieve was seamless film editing, which with film cameras at that time was no easy task. Each film reel could record up to approximately 10 minutes of footage, so what Hitchcock did was this. Of course we do notice that little change, but I think it's an excellent way to cut from one reel to the next without a big disruption. It shows innovation. It is like a combination of theatre and film. We have continuous dialogue and action, but the camera continues to be dynamic, capturing the drama. Since then we have seen several films using the one-room technique, or, of course, the extremely long take style. Now we enter the 1950s, where my all-time favourite director truly flourishes, making a powerfully influential film and different film of its time. I talk, of course, of Rashomon. Released in 1950, Kurosawa's film gained international success very quickly, earning the Golden Lion at the Venice Film Festival, and even without him knowing. Each time I watch Rashomon, it is like seeing it for the first time. It constantly plays with your mind, changing your perception start to finish. How the story is told is what makes it so powerful. We are presented a story of a murder from multiple perspectives, none of which we know for certain is the truth. It is a film that questions humans and lies. Jumping from one perspective to another, you are taken on a cerebral experience where you must analyse absolutely everything. Also in 1950, we have another masterwork from Billy Wilder, Sunset Boulevard. This is a story that comments on the facade of Hollywood, celebrity vanity, and the inability to accept growing old. The message of this film has more relevance today than it did back then. We live in a media-saturated culture where the bridge between reality and fantasy is distorted. Sunset Boulevard is also a comment on the silent era. Gloria Swanson was a star until her career faded in the silent period.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
This impact is also seen in Singin' in the Rain, a whole film just about this transition.
She's got to talk into the mic. I can't pick it up.
Cut! What's the matter, Dexter? It's Lena. Look, Lena, don't you remember I told you there's a microphone right there in the bush?
Yeah.
The bright colours, outstanding musical numbers, and witty comedy make this a beloved favourite of mine. It is a love letter to the silent period, and also fresh with its style and humour, and I watched it at just the right time. It wasn't long after seeing many classic silent films, and I totally felt the spirit of the film. A scene like this is hard not to love.
But be a comical one, they'll be standing in lines for those old honky-tonk.
The 50s was an important decade in America for the rise of the teenager. Of course, teenagers were always there, but it was at this time teen culture came to be. It was when teenagers gained a voice. This resulted in films like Rebel Without a Cause, While James Dean acted in only 3 films before his young death at 26, this film alone made him a cultural icon.
Is that meaning me? What?
A chicken!
Yes. You shouldn't call me that.
The performance he gives is extraordinary. Stepping on lines, mumbling and stuttering was not the kind of acting you'd see in films at this time, nor of this subject matter. It is a special film because of its themes of teenage angst, aspirations, and most importantly, sexuality and masculinity. A scene like this is memorable because of what's at stake. Jim's father is emasculated as he cleans up the food he has cropped, with his apron still on like a housewife. We must remember this is the 1950s, a time when family roles were practically set in stone. This is a powerful moment for acting in cinema. Jim can barely articulate what he wants to say, but we understand exactly what he's trying to say to his father.
I mean, you shouldn't... Don't... What are you...
Along with James Dean, Marlon Brando rose to fame with his unique acting ability. His reputation was notorious as he was difficult to work with, but it paid off. After giving an outstanding performance in A Streetcar Named Desire, he entered Hollywood history with On the Waterfront.
This ain't your night. My night, I could have taken Wilson apart. So what happens? He gets the title shot outdoors in a ballpark, and what do I get? A one-way ticket to Palookaville.
Indeed, this is a scene many will think of when you mention this film. On the Waterfront is a film that has stood the test of time for its emotional value. Furthermore, it is a film about the power of the working people. Brando's personal struggle is matched with that of the people who battle for better conditions. It gained 12 Oscar nominations, taking home 8. Hollywood was beginning to change, with acting and widescreen formats to challenge television, but also darker storylines. Things that would lead into the new wave in the 1960s and the 70s. This is my favourite Wells film, for its pessimistic, gritty noir tone, great use of lighting, and camera work. The opening shot is one of the most hailed in all of cinema. We glide through the rough surroundings of the US-Mexican border, knowing what's going to happen next. This visually alone creates the suspense. Films in places like France and Italy were going through changes. Taking a step back to the 1940s, we have Italian neorealism, with key filmmakers such as Roberto Rossellini and Vittorio De Sica. Perhaps the most iconic film, though, is De Sica's Bicycle Thieves. Having seen this film 3 times now, I have really grown to appreciate what this film represents. When exploring what came before, you will notice just how different its style is. Almost all film production took place indoors and on sound stages, whereas here, most of what we see was shot on location. We see tracking shots, scenes with rain, shots for the streets, and the poverty surrounding our protagonist. The gritty texture of this film was somewhat unprecedented. I find the story deeply universal and poignant. It is a story of the working class, hardship, and survival, as well as a political film about Italy at this time. On top of that, we explore the relation between the protagonist and his son Bruno, which is the emotive core of the narrative. Here we are seeing a family struggle, and it is impossible not to want them to turn out okay. However, this isn't Hollywood. Literally jumping to 1960, we had the French New Wave. Breathless was a film with no plot and a new editing style. It was a take on Hollywood filmmaking, almost mocking with love. A year previous, we had Francois Truffaut's The 400 Blows, one of the first coming-of-age films telling the story of a young boy who feels out of place, doesn't know what he wants, and is dealing with his parents' separation. The Nouvelle Vague was important in cinema history, but was an area that never struck me as much as it has others. What really struck me was the films of Japan during this time. Excluding American cinema, I don't think the cinema of any other specific country has affected me as much as Japan. Excluding animation, Rashomon was the first I had seen, and it blew me away. My fascination of Japanese culture started there and then. At first it was a lack of knowledge and an attraction to the exoticness of the otherness, which has now become a deep respect and passion as I have now grown to understand Japan's culture. Seven Samurai blows my mind in its 200-minute runtime. Its gritty cinematography, powerful performances, and simple but engaging plot make it hold up well more than 60 years on. The films of Akira Kurosawa, to me, are the biggest contribution to non-American film, and the work he done throughout his life, it's hard not to agree. Akira was a story about a man who discovered he has cancer. Takashi Shimura's performance, start to finish, is devastating and honest. High and Low looks at a rich business tycoon who has to make the ethical decision to save his chauffeur's child from a kidnapper or keep his money. The Hidden Fortress would influence George Lucas for Star Wars, with two Low characters being caught up in large changes in their world. One film of Kurosawa's I feel deserves more attention is Redbeard. It would mark his last collaboration with Toshiro Mifune, and what a way to finish. It is a film about psychology, suffering, compassion, and all spectrums of the human condition. The towering performance from everyone in the film just made me feel so much emotional adrenaline. Kurosawa is such a master of the camera, but also the soul. His films are so versatile in emotional spectrum, and this one really does show this. Kurosawa is not the only great Japanese filmmaker that I respect. Kenji Mizoguchi, Masaki Kobayashi, and Hiroshi Teshigahara are among the most prominent names associated with Japanese cinema. For Mizoguchi, my pick has to be Sancho the Bailiff. The film is deep, pessimistic, and painful to watch, but it is a film I won't forget. We see a family being split up and forced to work under brutal conditions. Mizoguchi scripts away modern life of all kind, setting it in the Heian period of Japan, reaching its primal core. Mizoguchi's film was a reflection of the treatment and position of women in contemporary Japan, attacking the lack of change in society. As for Teshigahara, he also comments on contemporary life. In the face of another, we are looking at a time of Japan's rapid technological and social change. They became westernized very quickly, with their economy growing at a miracle rate. To me, this film captures the loss of identity of both the nation and the individual. This is very much an urban problem, and the film is examining how individuality is at stake. It is almost postmodern. Tatsuya Nakadai gives one of his greatest performances, and I think this is one of the most thrilling works of the time. Moving on to Kobayashi, let's look at the Human Condition trilogy. It truly surprises me it took me so many years to discover this film and see it. I cannot stress enough how groundbreaking and remarkable a trilogy it is. Its sweeping scope, emotion, political allegory, and philosophical depth still hold relevance. We look at the horrors of war and the mistreatment of soldiers. This is a Japanese film criticizing the Japanese army, but more importantly, attacking the idea of war in any spectrum. We follow our protagonist soldier, Kaji, who in the beginning marries his beloved wife Michiko before joining the war effort. He is at first to supervise mining, where Chinese people are doing forced labour. Kaji has humanistic ideals, not trying to stop the chaos of the war, but trying to make it a little easier. He is at a constant struggle with this, and the film shows a deep and brooding character development. The Human Condition trilogy is truly one of the greatest creations in cinema, which I do hope more people see. Hollywood in the late 1950s and early 1960s was in a deep crisis. Television made things more competitive, leading to gimmicks such as double bills and new formats such as Cinerama and Panavision. However, the 60s would be a turning point for Hollywood. Leading up to that, we have a few films that start to become more daring. Let's start with Psycho. In 1960, Alfred Hitchcock released his film Psycho under strict rules. No one was to leave or enter the auditorium when the film began. The audience at this time, being sensitive, were shocked, thrilled, and horrified. The horror and thriller genre was pushed to new boundaries. Hitchcock battled the censors for the release of this film. Even the showing of a toilet flushing was considered indecent. Psycho was one of my most beloved films, and it really surprised me on first viewing. Not because it was horrifying, but for how thrilling and unpredictable it was. Hitchcock isn't titled the master of suspense for nothing. His use of the camera, voyeurism, sexuality, and psychology are among his stylistic traits and themes, and Psycho has all of them. Stanley Kubrick would be another significant figure in cinematic change. In the 1960s, he made two impactful films. Dr. Strangelove was a film released at a time when the Cold War was on everyone's consciousness. Dr. Strangelove is a straight-up satire examining the ridiculousness of the politics of war.
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
As a dark comedy, its content is quite daring, and I think this is one of the funniest films of all time. And now we're in the second half of the 1960s. It is then that the most significant and important change in cinema history was taking place. Now we were about to see where cinema could take us. In 1966, Hollywood saw the end of the long-standing production code that had restricted filmmakers for so long. Now they had a chance to put on screen the kind of content that would shake America. It is over the next 15 years the most powerful and influential films would be made that are not only decade-defining, but defining of cinema itself. Historians have often used the phrase movie brats when referring to the group of filmmakers who made their start. Steven Spielberg, Brian De Palma, William Friedkin, Martin Scorsese, and Francis Ford Coppola are of the most notable. And that isn't everyone. Let's take a look at some of the films at the end of the 60s that would shape the 70s. 1967, Midnight Cowboy. John Voight plays Joe Buck, a Texas cowboy who comes to New York as a male prostitute, where he meets Dustin Hoffman's character, a con man named Ratso Rizzo.
I'm walking here! I'm walking here!
The gritty and scandalous material warranted this film an X rating at the time, the only X-rated film ever to win Best Picture. Midnight Cowboy shows the streets of New York beyond their Hollywood facade of perfection and beauty, digging into its underbelly. Drugs, prostitution, poverty and crime. But a film that does this on a higher level was Dennis Hopper's Easy Rider, a film that was undoubtedly produced under the influence of whatever Hopper could get his hands on.
Born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate.
In this scene, what we see is real. They really are tripping. Easy Rider made a huge cultural impact. Not only did it launch Jack Nicholson to stardom, but it was part of the countercultural movement. America was changing and its young people felt out of place. In Mike Nichols' The Graduate, this couldn't be more clear. Dustin Hoffman plays a young man just out of university with no true desire to do anything. He is alienated and confused. The Graduate still stands as one of the funniest comedies ever, and its content is still scandalous. A young man being seduced by a woman old enough to be his mother.
Opening up your personal life to me and tell me your husband won't be home for hours?
So?
Mrs. Robinson, you're trying to seduce me.
The Graduate holds up well in its subject matter, maintaining a relevant idea of post-teen angst and being lost in a confusing time. Personally, I think the most striking film I saw was Bonnie and Clyde, which I had seen when I was about 16. I still find it to be an extremely shocking film. When I first saw it, it just made my hair stick up and my knees weak. The intense acting, the violence, and the thrilling action was like something I'd never seen. I do apologise to spoil the film's climax, but I feel like I need to put it here. When I saw this scene, my body was at a standstill. This is still one of the most shocking and violent dramatic scenes ever put on the screen. And yet there's barely any blood. "2001: A Space Odyssey" is an experience I still can't compare to any other. It is a truly hypnotic journey that stimulates you visually and orally. Kubrick's masterful use of composition, camera movement and music are obvious in this work. Many books and essays have been written upon this film's impact and interpretations, as it truly shows the subjective nature of cinema. I think every time I've seen this film I draw to a new idea about what its meaning is, and feel like I'm seeing it for the first time. Give some sort of gut reaction to the images on screen. This is an example of how films should be felt and experienced before being understood. These 5 films have unprecedented style and went to areas that hadn't been explored yet. But there was more to come. Few films have struck me as much as this one did. Not long after witnessing what Bonnie and Clyde offered, Stanley Kubrick's other masterpiece, A Clockwork Orange, was on a whole other level. Its dystopian setting, masterful use of colour, framing, music, camera movement and lighting just blow my mind. It explores themes of governmental corruption, a violent youth, drug use and sexuality, and we see one of the most vicious anti-heroes on screen. Clockwork Orange remains one of the most shocking films ever made. At the time of release, it stirred controversy, particularly in the UK, where a group of young men had dressed up similarly to the Droog gang and broke into a woman's house, raping her. Telling the police what inspired them, the film became a target of bad influence. Kubrick received hate mail and even death threats, which led to him finally withdrawing the film. It would not be seen legally for another 25 years. Anthony Burgess's novel, which I have read, is excellent source material. Arguably, the hardest part of the adaptation was the language.
Right.
In the novel, Burgess created a style of communication which was inspired by Russian language and British Cockney slang. It even had a translation section at the back of the book. Kubrick took the world Burgess wrote upon and turned it into an utter sensory experience. The editing, composition and slow motion warp you into the destructive world of Alex DeLarge. In a scene like this, you're right there with Alex. Nothing here is trickery. Malcolm McDowell's eyes are fixated open. This was another thing we began to see in the 70s cinema. More dedicated performances, and also things that would not be allowed in the studio system.
I want to be sick. Get something for me to be sick in.
While in no way it is one of my favourite films, I think it showed just how crazy the 70s was going to get. John Waters' film is twisted, disgusting, and viciously raunchy. Transvestite icon Divine actually eats real feces, and a chicken almost gets smothered during a sex scene, which is definitely going beyond animal rights. Putting such hard images on the screen was also being done by Wes Craven. The Last House on the Left was rejected as certification by the BBFC for UK distribution for its sadism and violence. Already from just a handful of examples, you can see how totally insane some filmmakers were getting. Things became more sexually explicit, aggressive and daring. Now to discuss more films in this decade, we shall split it up, looking at how genres were changed and redefined. Perhaps we should begin with what might be the most iconic film of its genre and decade. I talk, of course, of The Godfather. In 1967, author Mario Puzo wrote a crime novel chronicling the story of the 5 mafia families which sold over 9 million copies in 2 years. Later on, this would enter a very rocky production lasting from 1969 until its release.
I'm gonna speak Italian.
Francis Ford Coppola was offered to direct the film, with film producer Peter Bart claiming he would work on a low budget. Coppola would reject this at first, but for financial reasons, took on the job. The amount of problems this film had on production makes you wonder how it was made. For the role of Michael Corleone, they got the unknown actor Al Pacino. They finally got Marlon Brando on the job, who during filming hadn't rehearsed his lines. The magic of film is how you can cheat the audience. His lines would be written on title cards and fruit baskets, or even on his shirt cuffs. And yet this man has been called the greatest actor of all time. Production was chaos, as Coppola would say in interviews. He doubted that it would ever even be a good film, but in the end it would win 3 of its 7 Academy Award nominations. The Godfather deserves the slow of attention it gets. It becomes a richer experience upon repeat viewings. And the same can be said for what is considered by many the greatest sequel ever made. The Godfather Part 2 was nominated for 11 Academy Awards, winning 6, including Best Picture and Best Director again for Coppola. Chronicling the rise of Don Corleone, making a start as an Italian immigrant in America, we also follow the present-day Michael Corleone as he continues the family business.
In my home! In my bedroom where my wife sleeps! Where my children come and play with their toys.
Running at 3 hours and 20 minutes, it's a dense viewing of drama and action. These 2 films sit highly with my all-time favourites, as they are rich with character and social commentary. They are the quintessential gangster films. Even the musical genre went through a different stage. Taking one look at Cabaret shows that we're no longer in the period of Hello Dolly or The Sound of Music. Cabaret is a story set in 1931 Berlin, telling the story of an American woman and British man finding each other.
Oh God, how depressing. I think I'm an international...
In the background we see the rise of the Nazi Party. All of the songs, with the exception of one, are sang within the Kit Kat Club, where Sally Bowles, played by Liza Minnelli, works. This is a sexually charged film, and it was the one that won Best Director for Bob Fosse, over Coppola for The Godfather that year. The songs are satirical, and the love triangle was complex. I love Cabaret for its dark edge and tempo.
Showtime, folks.
Another great work from Bob Fosse would have to be All That Jazz. Here we see a self-reflexive musical. It follows Joe Gideon, a choreographer working on a new musical, and his film about a stand-up comedian. As an autobiographical piece, it stands as a vicious betrayal of oneself. It is as if Fosse was criticising himself in this work, looking at his own life. All That Jazz has an intricate use of musical numbers, both in surreal and real ways. As I explored 70s cinema, this film struck me because of its great musical numbers, but mostly its dramatic tone. I think of the musicals of this time, the one that has influenced me the most is a cult film. In fact, it's the longest running annually released theatrical film of all time. And it makes you give over to absolute pleasure.
Touch me. I wanna be dirty. Little chummy, fulfill me. Creature of the night.
I was exposed to this film by a friend when I was only 15. I saw it live within that year, as it was coincidentally playing at a local theatre. Since then, I have seen it at least 10 times, with unforgettable characters, crazy outfits, cheesy dialogue, and a great sing-along track. There is a reason this film has gained its reputation.
Janet! Rook!
Initially, not many people cared for it. Its audience began to grow years later, and it started a cult following. It would be shown in theatres frequently, with people dressing as the characters both at the film and the live performances. Its slap-on-the-face look at sexuality is comical and irresistibly fun. How can you not want to do the time warp when you see this? In 1975, Hollywood saw the release of Jaws, a shocking new film from the young director Steven Spielberg. After his success with the TV movie Duel and the theatrical release The Sugarland Express, he directed what is among the most iconic films of the 70s. Upon its release, it terrified audiences, and I am sure they thought twice about going swimming in the ocean. Spielberg proves he's an excellent storyteller in a film like this. The use of the camera as the shark's perspective is frightening because we never see it. We are engaged with the peril on the boat because of the well-written characters. It is a film going beyond a shark attack. It represents fear itself. That's why the film holds up so well today, even if people criticize how real the shark looks. I think it looks pretty good. Perhaps the most culturally influential film to come out of the 70s was Star Wars. I am not a hardcore fan, but I appreciate the story and adventure. The original trilogy still remains my favourite of all the Star Wars films. George Lucas's ambitious concept of a space drama first hit the screen in 1977, very quickly becoming a phenomenon. With box office records, merchandise, and even a Christmas special on TV, it is easy to see the impact it made. Many big fans are likely to point out the sources of inspiration for the film, as Lucas does himself state, and it goes back to my favourite director Akira Kurosawa, as I mentioned earlier. Instead of two lowly Japanese characters, we have R2-D2 and C-3PO. It is great to see Lucas drawing inspiration from a master storyteller and taking it to space. The film series has been parodied and referenced constantly through pop culture. From Spaceballs by Mel Brooks to Family Guy's Blue Harvest, Star Wars will not be forgotten. One genre that changed incredibly in both the 70s and the 80s was the horror genre. We had the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Hills Have Eyes, Suspiria, Alien, Dawn of the Dead, The Wicker Man, and Carrie. My favourite two are The Exorcist and Halloween. Both have become parodied, referenced, and influential since their release. Halloween is a very simple horror film. Its characters aren't complex, and yet it's a thrilling film. Perhaps it's the believability of its villain, an escaped mental patient. With his expressionless white mask, not being able to see his face adds to the terror. It leaves a blank space for us to put a face on the killer. Or perhaps it is that Michael Myers represents, like Jaws, pure evil. John Carpenter's theme in all its simplicity is another thing that stood out with this film. Just listening to it makes your hair stand on end. However, years before Halloween, the most audacious and genre-changing film since Psycho was The Exorcist. William Friedkin, known for pushing the envelope of cinema, this was the big one. People fainted and threw up during screenings. Cinemas were boycotted by religious groups, calling the film sacrilegious and evil. It is when we look at events like this we realise how powerful film can be. It evoked absolute terror with audiences. A simple innocent girl becomes possessed by pure evil. And regardless of protests and the reaction from the Catholic Church, the film was the 9th highest grossing film of all time, when adjusted for inflation. People saw it, and the horror genre would never be the same again.
Fuck him! Fuck him, Garrus!
Now before I leave the 70s, I want to share with you what are my favourite films of the period, beside A Clockwork Orange. In Hollywood, we had some films that had deep social commentary on America, also full of poetry and philosophy. Then, some films around Europe gained a rougher texture, exploring racism, relationships and family. And for films exploring human relationships, we can look at Scenes from a Marriage from master Ingmar Bergman. Bergman's creation was released as a 5-part TV series over 5 hours long, and as a theatrical release running at 3 hours. Having watched the TV version, I was floored. The unflinching performances, the motion-filled cinematography, the silences and long takes made my experience tense and entrancing. We look at a married couple with 2 kids as their relationship enters turmoil. Bergman takes a versatile look at love and the human condition with an unforgiving edge. The endless desire for more, to love and to be loved, to cheat and to hate. It looks at the spiraling changes that can occur in a person's life. One minute you love something, and the next you loathe it. Liv Ullmann gives an astonishing performance that could make a stone cry. I feel the same about Bergman's other masterpiece, Autumn Sonata. A daughter invites her mother, whom she hasn't seen in 7 years, to her village. We learn the reasons for this disconnect through brutal and devastating dialogue as they discuss the past. What Bergman shows us is a disconnection between parent and child, the desire for respect, affection and approval. Furthermore, it taps into what can happen when emotions are bottled up. It is Liv Ullmann's last performance, and what a knockout one it is. Even in Rainer Werner Fassbinder's Fear Eats the Soul, we see a look at human relationships. As a remake of Douglas Sirk's All That Heaven Allows, instead of a society widow falling in love with a gardener, we get an old German woman finding love with an immigrant. To the shock of everyone around her, it is love beyond race and culture. Fassbinder died at 37, but made over 40 feature films. Fear Eats the Soul was shot in just 15 days on a small budget. The result is an impressive film with heart. The thing I love most in this film is the excellent use of the camera and framing. By spacing characters, we feel not only physical distance, but also the mental one. Many shots we will get a straight-on view of a character trapped within a door frame. Engaging with the theme of xenophobia and social alienation, it captures the character's entrapment. Fear Eats the Soul was one of the first foreign films I came across, and perhaps one of the films that made me see beyond the English language. Watching this love story, I was touched. It showed that cinema goes beyond linguistic and cultural barriers. It can communicate universal and human messages. One film that I feel taps into the mind like no other is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Based on the novel by Ken Kesey, it is a story about a convict who pretends he is insane to get out of prison and to be transferred to a mental institute. Czechoslovakian director Milos Forman brings this masterpiece to the screen, exploring the human spirit, while also being filled with social criticism. The patients of the mental ward are the citizens, and the staff and nurses are the politicians in charge. McMurphy's unconventional behaviour represents challenge of authority, the free thinker. McMurphy soon discovers there is no other way but to follow the rules set by the ward. I can't think of a film that makes me laugh, cry and be held in suspense in a way that this film does.
All right. right, Martini, get it back, I'm in the open. What are you doing? You threw the goddamn ball into the fence, Christ almighty! You threw the ball into the fence, there's nobody there!
It has so many breath-holding moments. As I have mentioned, when I was 15 to 16, I started to discover films that changed my life. This is one of them. It shook me up, and I couldn't do anything after I saw it. I just sat in awe and amazement. The casting is fantastic and truly star-studded. Jack Nicholson, Danny DeVito, Christopher Lloyd, Brad Dourif and Louise Fletcher are among the most notable actors of American cinema. The performances given are golden and honest, and so is the story and cinematography. As a whole, it will make you laugh, cry, and be thrilled. Just like life itself, it's an emotional roller coaster. This is one of those few films I can say without any hesitation is truly perfect. A real cinematic experience. Another truly evocative film of the 70s would have to be Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now. Showing the horrific nature of war and a reflection of the Vietnam War, it is one of the most astonishing films ever made. And a miracle. With one of the most hellish shoots, you could imagine it would be one of the greatest war films ever made. Coppola lost 100 pounds in weight from the stress. He invested all his money into the film. Martin Sheen had a heart attack during filming. A typhoon destroyed almost all the sets and equipment. On top of that, we have the great story of Marlon Brando. Requesting he be paid $3 million for 4 weeks of work, he turned up incredibly overweight, 4 days late, having not even read the script. As a filmmaker myself, I simply cannot imagine what shooting Apocalypse Now must have been like.
I mean, after all, look at Vietnam. Look at my movie, you'll see what I'm talking.
What I do know is it's a film full of gorgeous cinematography, a brooding atmosphere, and harrowing scenes of violence. War is truly apocalyptic, and that is exactly what you witness here. Like Midnight Cowboy, Taxi Driver shows the grime of a city. This time it appears like a toxic jungle where you must fight for survival. The opening shots set you up for a mesmerizing experience into the mind of Travis Bickle. A single man, supposed ex-Vietnam veteran and loner. Now this film is 40 years old and remains a fresh masterpiece for modern viewing. Taxi Driver is deeply subjective, and as I have rewatched it each time, I keep noticing new things and coming to new conclusions. We never really can trust what happens. This story is through the perspective of Bickle. Is this how he sees the world? Paul Schrader's script is one of the greatest original stories ever conceived, and no better person could direct it than Martin Scorsese. In a film 3 years earlier, we see Scorsese's depiction of New York, with its lowly characters mixed up in violence and drugs. And now he would delve deeper. Robert De Niro gives what is among his best performances, capturing the quiet and tormented soul of Travis Bickle, a man lost in a sea of poison. The film as a whole could be many things. Is it a criticism of the alienation in American society of the time? What does it say about masculinity, racism, drug abuse, social decay and pressure? I think it is left to the individual viewer to make that assumption. The build-up of political and social allegories in this time was just incredible. Not only did films become more sexual and more violent, but you could see a state of post-modernity and existentialism. A post-war generation in protest of what came before. After the counterculture of the 60s, the 70s would continue this fashion, with artists creating narratives of these confusing times. For all that I have discussed, it is why the films of the 70s stick out to me so much, and they fascinate me. There were some of the films that happened to be from that decade that introduced me to the power of cinema, and with that sentiment, it holds a place in my heart. This segment no doubt is longer than the others, and yet I can't even mention filmmakers such as Woody Allen, John Cassavetes, Robert Altman, and even Sidney Lumet. Simply we haven't got time. Because now, ladies and gentlemen, we're taking a step into the 1980s. Having just talked of Taxi Driver, the start of the 1980s had another masterwork from Scorsese and De Niro. The film is beautifully shot, with the camera and editing pushing the story and representing the character's psyche. De Niro plays Jack LaMotta, a famous boxer who struggles with his family relations. Shadowing the real LaMotta, De Niro was told he had the potential to go pro, having trained for 18 months to get in shape for the role. which stands as proof as to why De Niro has a great reputation. This is method acting. Treating The Ring as an allegory of life, Scorsese tells a film not about boxing, but about internal struggle. Germany would also boast excellent films in the 1980s, with Werner Herzog at the forefront of this. Fitzcarraldo is one of the most amazing spectacles to see in all its muddy glory. When we watch the film, it is like seeing the struggle of it being made. Brian Fitzgerald, currently living in Peru, decides to enter the rubber business in order to earn enough money to build an opera house in the middle of the jungle. He is later met with the challenge of an ocean current, and to avoid it he pulls the 360-ton boat over a mountain. I couldn't believe I hadn't heard of this film when I came across it. It is utterly amazing. What better is that this was done with the most basic of techniques: rope, trees, earth and manpower. This is a story about conquest of power and doing whatever it takes to gain it. Along the way, it can also be as a story of absolute madness, but with passion. More was possible at this time. Technology was improving, budgets got larger, and soon computer-generated images would start to form. One of the most stunning films ever made has no CGI, but is full of perspective trickery, great set design, and noirish lighting. Ridley Scott's Blade Runner was years ahead of its time. The visual effects are astonishing, but it's not just for the visual splendor I think this is a masterpiece. Looking at the future, it touches upon the ideas that are explored in postmodernism. That of constant regurgitation, and that nothing is new. This is manifested in the idea of the replicants, robots that appear so human, we can't even tell anymore. As postmodernism will tell us, it blurs the lines between reality and fantasy. The film moves at a very slow and brooding pace, assisted with its cinematography and very hypnotic soundtrack. Blade Runner is a rich viewing that looks just as good now as it did 30 years ago. There's so much to talk about, I don't even know how to condense everything to avoid hours of rambling. In the horror genre, we have well-known horror films such as A Nightmare on Elm Street, The Fly, and The Thing. Then we also have the rise of the B-horror genre, when the rise of VHS made it possible. It was a new format for independent and amateur filmmakers to tell stories on shoestring budgets. While many of these films are absolute trash, some of them are trash of beauty. I have a soft spot for films like Reanimator, Toxic Avenger, and Basket Case. Many of the B-horror films suffer from ridiculous plots, bad storytelling, and cheesy effects and acting. However, in many you see the spirit and passion of cinema. Basket Case was shot on just $35,000. To compare to a film of the same year, Gandhi cost $22 million. Basket Case is not a film that makes an impact, but an amusing watch that would spawn two surprisingly entertaining sequels. The horror film of the 80s that really impacted me was David Cronenberg's The Fly. It is one of the rare cases where a remake supersedes the original. Going from the classic 50s B-horror to a grotesque body horror film, it takes the concept to a whole other level. I was repulsed, shocked, disturbed, but amazed. When comparing it to the early horror films I discussed, at its core it is still a story about man's obsession of invention and progression. In The Fly, it is about the consequence of this, which is manifested in Seth Brundle's transformation. Another thing I loved about the 80s was it was an age of terrific makeup and special effects. The age of animatronics and actual handcrafted imagery. That is what cinema should be. Not 95% post-production, but on the set. It is impossible for me to avoid discussing Stanley Kubrick's The Shining when looking at 80s horror. What is displayed here is a unique thrilling film from a visual master that gives you a gut reaction. The Shining is cryptic in its meaning, with a documentary dedicated to interpretations of the film from different perspectives. I can never pinpoint what the film stands for, but for me, it is a showing of absolute insanity. Jack Torrance faces isolation from society in a large, silent and empty hotel. While he has his family, perhaps it is a case of cabin fever to the extreme. Perhaps everything we see is a fantasy. What makes The Shining work so well is that it creates terror just with the basic things. The use of music, editing, composition and limited space add to the isolating and brooding atmosphere. This is the first documentary I've mentioned so far, and that is because of how profound it is. Filmmaker Claude Lanzmann spent 10 years interviewing survivors, their relatives, and the people who were there when their Jewish neighbours were thrown out of their homes during the Holocaust. We even have a secretly filmed interview with an SS officer telling us the process of the mass killing. I don't think any documentary has shocked me or drained me more. Showa is 9.5 hours long and was not an easy watch, but I felt absolutely compelled to finish it. What we get is a coverage of the Holocaust without any archival images or footage. Instead, we focus on the faces and stories of the people on screen. This gives it an entirely human focus. Outside the interviews, Lanzmann also filmed the present-day locations of where these concentration camps and death camps had been. And they were surrounded by tranquil nature and beauty. This juxtaposition of evil is real, and that's what makes Showa such a terrifying and evocative work. Showa is more than just a film. It's a historical document. Shooting over 350 hours of footage, he has successfully made a work asking the people who've experienced one of the greatest tragedies we have known, imprinting it in history forever. That is true cinema. The 80s saw the rise of computer technology with films like Tron and the forming of Pixar. While it would be the 90s before CGI would really kick off, we saw some great animated films from Japan. In 1979, animator Hayao Miyazaki would direct his first film, The Castle of Cagliostro. However, it is when he collaborated with Isao Takahata and Studio Ghibli was formed that he would make his finest works. The first of these films is Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. This is not officially a Ghibli film, but many consider it the start of the company. Nausicaa is a beautiful story about environmentalism and urban expansion set in a fictional space. It is never preachy, and its characters had a much more adult feel to them, unlike most animated films up to this point. And for Ghibli's second film, this couldn't be said more. Anytime I talk about this film, it is easy to find a lump in my throat. Grave of the Fireflies is one of the most devastating films ever made, let alone an animated one. I think it is the first animated film to reach such a level of emotional maturity. We open to the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Young Seita and his sister have to stick together after their mother has suffered serious injury. Their father is out in the war, causing them to live with their aunt and later travel and hope for survival. For anyone who has seen the film, they know it is a harrowing experience. Takahata stated during its release that this isn't a film about the war, and I think this is clear to an extent. The war is only ever briefly mentioned, and this story is about innocent people struggling to survive during tumultuous times. A personal note to add to this film is that it really was the first Ghibli film I'd ever witnessed. At the time I didn't know, until much later. I believe I was 12 or so, sitting up late and flicking through TV channels. I saw the title and I ended up watching it. I may have missed the first few minutes, but what I was positive of was its emotional impact. I was crying, I remember that. Knowing nothing of Hiroshima or the war at that time, it was simply seeing these young characters in such a horrible position. I'd forgotten the film for such a long time, and it was perhaps at 16 or so I began to delve into the Ghibli filmography. My Neighbor Totoro is still one of their most iconic films, and especially in the merchandising field. I wish I had been exposed to such films as a child, as they are full of imagination, curiosity, and innocence. Totoro is one of the rare instances a film has no outright conflict or antagonism. It is a truly fleeting film. There is no real plot. It's an experience. It is hard not to want to hug the large and furry Totoro, and I think as an adult it is a film that makes us want to be a kid again. That is the heart of Studio Ghibli. A non-Ghibli animated film at the end of the 80s worth discussing is Akira. It can be seen as influences by the setting of Blade Runner, but we also see it as an influence on films like The Matrix much later. Akira is set in a post-World War III Tokyo where technology has evolved and the streets are grimy and urban. The animation style is astonishing, and Akira works extremely well as an action thriller. A scene like this proves it. An exciting chase sequence on motorcycles. The compelling thing about the story is it can be interpreted as a reflection of post-Hiroshima Japan. Even though Japan suffered serious damage to their country, they would have an economic boom from the 50s onwards, becoming one of the best in the world. They would go on to have big city problems, the kind we saw earlier in films like Taxi Driver. Large populations in small places equals urban problems, rising crime, and pollution. Akira looks at this in the most extreme form. The 80s presented us with coming-of-age movies directed towards teenagers. While today the subgenre feels deeply cliched and cheesy, there are some truly great ones. Stand By Me, Heathers, and The Breakfast Club, to name a few. They set the standard of the genre in a way. The 80s also saw action movies get bigger and better. Die Hard, The Terminator, and Rambo are among the most notable. The 80s was such a nostalgic time. Many films, TV shows, and music videos are relished today. One look at something like Kung Fury and this is clear. Now we are about to enter another decade, and our next chapter of film, where cinema evolves with the new technologies, platforms, and culture. Let's go.
I'm funny how? I mean, funny like I'm a clown, I amuse you. I make you laugh. I'm here to fucking amuse you. What do you mean funny? Funny how? How am I funny?
I think an excellent film to begin with is Goodfellas. Goodfellas, like Godfather, is a quintessential gangster film. It is wickedly funny, dramatic, and thrilling. Martin Scorsese shows how innovative he could be even 2 decades into his career. His use of music and camera movement in a film like this shows how he is like a conductor of an orchestra. In one of the most famous scenes of all time, we see Ray Liotta enter a club. All in one take, we are with him. It is his first time at the club, as it is for us. Anyone who is a filmmaker will understand how hard it would have been to shoot a scene like this. In one part, the camera follows the waiters as they go to different tables. This required excellent choreography and timing. Aside being a technical achievement, Scorsese uses these elements to progress the story. This is what good filmmaking is all about. Another film of the same year I will always have a soft spot for is Edward Scissorhands. I think that when I was exposed to it at 15, I identified with the story very heavily. It is hard for me not to feel sentimental about it. Some see the romance as foolish, but the film at its core has a beautiful message. After 26 years of its release, I still think it's Tim Burton's best work. The story looks at the Frankenstein-like creation of Edward Scissorhands, who encounters an Avon lady who wanders into the ruinous old mansion of the inventor who made him. He is soon brought back to her suburban home where neighbours are fascinated and her daughter takes interest in him. This is a story looking at a suburban America, but most importantly, the outsider. Edward is gentle, fragile, and unknowing of the world outside that which his inventor had taught him before his death. Depp's portrayal captures this nervous innocence so well. He just wants to be accepted. He is a freak in the eyes of the society, which can easily be seen to how people in all societies can cast those out who appear or act differently to the majority. The hands themselves play an excellent metaphor for being out of touch. In the film, it is not just a physical barrier, but represents an emotional one. For what it is a magical and moving experience, at least for me. The style of film was of course changing. One of the most influential new filmmakers of the 90s was Quentin Tarantino. To this day, Pulp Fiction is endlessly watched, reviewed, quoted and praised. Even now I think it is Tarantino's greatest film for its hilarity, use of music, characters and narrative structure. Like Reservoir Dogs, it has an all-star cast and a unique, bold visual look. Tarantino's style would define the decade and continues to be a strong influence for filmmakers today. Pulp Fiction isn't the first film to have a non-linear narrative, but it made it more popular. Much of Tarantino's work fits into the category of postmodernism, with many dividing between calling him a hack or a genius. His films are certainly unique in style, but definitely owe themselves to other films. Regardless, his work stands as richly entertaining.
Everybody be cool, this is a robbery!
Chinese cinema went through what historians refer to as the 5th generation of Chinese filmmakers. Those that made it popular internationally in the mid-1980s. The most famous of these directors were Zhang Yimou and Shen Cage, who made some of their best work in the 90s. In Raise the Red Lantern, we follow the story of a young woman's descent into the life of a concubine. Here she meets the other concubines of the rich master, who all fight for his respect and attention. The film is gorgeously shot with the dominance of orange and red, giving it a very warm tone, juxtaposing the film's story. The space of Gong Wei's character is tight and claustrophobic. In a shot like this, it resembles a prison. This is a critical look at China's history, but was made to evoke thought about the contemporary treatment of women in Chinese society. As a piece about isolation, internal struggle, entrapment and desperation, it is a moving piece of work. And on the topic of concubines, my all-time favourite Chinese film has to be Farewell My Concubine, directed by Shen Cage. It is an epic story of two children's experience in a theatre troupe, which would go on to last for 50 years. In the backdrop is some of the biggest changes to occur in Chinese history, from the 20s right up to the 70s. At nearly 3 hours long, it is a highly ambitious and emotionally gripping story. Its cinematography is also lavish, capturing the spirit of Chinese theatre in all its fluorescent and elaborate colours. Knowing nothing of Chinese theatre before seeing this film, it blew me away. Seeing the performances of the young protagonists was something utterly magical, a culture I had not been exposed to before. The story has so many overarching themes, with the dominant focus being on the characters' tumultuous relationship. We see them go through pain, jealousy, obsession, persecution and trauma. Farewell My Concubine is a masterpiece for its scale, time span and level of subtext. In 1993, after 3 years of production, The Nightmare Before Christmas was released. This film is key in my experience with movies, as it may have been the one that made me want to create. At first I was impressed by the stop motion process, and I had an ambition around the age of 13 or so to actually be an animator. I began watching commentaries from Kung Fu Panda to Corpse Bride and just learning how artists constructed animated worlds. This then tied me, of course, to the art of cinema.
What's this? What's this? There's color everywhere. What's this? There's white things in the air. What's this?
I still love The Nightmare Before Christmas. It's one of the most imaginative and original worlds to be seen in an animated film. The songs are lovable and hard not to sing along to after seeing it 20 times. I remember a point I had watched it 3 times in the same week, almost remembering the film line for line. This showed the true symptoms of a cinephile. Overall, it's another that holds a place in my heart for how stunning and charming it is.
What are you going to do? I'm going to do the best I can.
However, the significant move in animation of the 90s was the rise of feature-length computer animated movies. And in the year I was born we had Toy Story, a true game changer in animation. Taking 5 years to bring to the screen, it is still perhaps their most beloved work. Spawning 2 sequels, its universe sparks with creativity, making it a delight for both kids and adults. And maybe adults even more. Everyone remembers being a child, and the toys featured created a level of nostalgia of a time when your toys were more than just inanimate objects. Toy Story plays with that and has an entire room come to life when humans aren't around. The adult-aimed jokes and well-written characters really do make this a lovable and timeless film. But traditional animation would still continue to flourish, and especially so with the works of Studio Ghibli. Princess Mononoke would be the highest grossing film of all time in Japan until the release of Titanic. What we see is how diverse Hayao Miyazaki is as an artist. Unlike The Innocence of Totoro, this is a story about war, tribes, expansion and human conflict and violence. It can easily be interpreted as a look at how the entire world in its history has been a world of savagery, evil and hatred. A world about conquering and killing. Princess Mononoke is a great action thriller while maintaining fantastical moments. It pushed animation to another level. And with talking of Miyazaki's genius, one cannot go without mentioning Spirited Away. This would surpass both Mononoke and Titanic as being the highest grossing film in Japan. It is among their most popular and iconic works. The world that Miyazaki and the entire company of Ghibli bring to the screen is one of the most vivid, original and wacky worlds I have ever seen. When first viewing this film, you have no idea what to expect. From sludge monsters to an old woman with an oversized head. You're really transported. The animation is astonishingly beautiful and the story is captivating. It proves how wonderful the medium of animation can be, and it should be treated the same as live action. 2 masterpieces in the 90s of similar themes are Schindler's List and Life is Beautiful. Representing the Holocaust in cinema has always been troublesome in terms of ethics, honesty, and trying to capture the reality. Schindler's List was first brought up around 1980, with Spielberg saying he would not make it, wanting to become more mature. The project went to both Martin Scorsese and Roman Polanski, who rejected it. However, Polanski would make his own devastating film on the subject with The Pianist. A decade later, Spielberg began making the film, and for me it's his greatest achievement. Spielberg is definitely a commercial director, but some of his films have emotional range, well-written stories, and very relatable characters. Schindler's List is a work on another level, attempting to capture the horrific nature of the Holocaust. Shot in black and white, it was the first ambitious attempt to depict it on the screen. This is no easy watch, and not one to re-watch frequently, but it stands as one of his most successful films. I was left unable to move from my seat for a while, and as I put the DVD back in its case, I just stared at nothing for a minute or two, taking in what the film showed. It is a harrowing experience, but one that gives you insight to the tragedies that have ensued our past. Then there is Life is Beautiful. Using humour and tragedy to tell its story, it is very different to Schindler's List. The first moments of the film start off as a charming, happy story about a man starting a family. We're taken on a darker journey very quickly, and the father ends up in a work camp with his son. To shield him from the harsh reality, he pretends everything is a big game and everyone there is competing. Using this, the film captures the innocence of humanity and its fragility. It is truly one of the most heartwarming character relationships in all of cinema. The father loves his son and does his best not to make this a traumatic experience. The Chaplin-esque Roberto Benigni, who directed, co-wrote and stars as the father, made a compelling work that manages to give an optimistic afterthought. You will laugh, but more importantly, you will cry. As the 90s came to a close, we had the release of the DVD format, bigger TVs, MP3 players, and most importantly, the rise of the internet. This will come more fully into view in the 2000s, but as of now in our journey, Western society has entered a new stage of new conveniences, culture, and ideologies. TV shows such as Mad Men, 6 Feet Under, and The Sopranos deconstruct this state of crisis, as cinema has also done. Let's take a look at Fight Club. Based on the novel by Chuck Palahniuk, it is a vicious dissection of the modern human condition. Masculinity, materialism, false representation, sexuality, and capitalism are all targeted. It is ironic for a piece of pop culture in Hollywood to look at such themes, the very place that constructs these images of fantasy that people can't live up to. David Fincher, in that respect, has constructed a self-reflexive work. Fight Club blew my mind at first, and rewatching it you constantly pick up on new things. The subtext of the film is overwhelming on a first viewing. I hadn't realised the symbolism of moments like this. Edward Norton saying a copy of a copy of a copy, whilst using a photocopier, with a Starbucks cup on top of it, clearly mocking the constant reciprocation of commodity goods. As time goes on, I think the message of Fight Club serves more relevance. It works as a warning to not let your life be led by the things you own, because they might end up owning you.
It's just our couch! This isn't life!
This is just stuff. And it's become more important to you than living. Well, honey, that's just nuts.
While also looking at materialism and criticising the American dream, the film explores domesticity, teenage angst, suppressed homosexuality, and regret. Alan Ball's powerful script takes you on both a comedic and tragic journey. Kevin Spacey gives a charismatic performance as Lester Burnham, a man trapped in a job where he is treated like a number and begins to grow tiresome of his mundane and repetitious life. I think American Beauty has one of the most satisfying character developments of all time. From blackmailing his boss to smoking weed, he begins living his life the way he wants. Ball, who would go on to create 6 Feet Under, is a genius storyteller. The film looks at multiple character arcs without becoming too muddled. For its scope and shortness of time, it maintains its message and focus, which is what makes American Beauty such a delightful and compelling watch.
I will sell this house today.
Then we have a film that has grown on me through repeat viewings, The Truman Show. Jim Carrey proves he is not just a funny actor with a rubber face, but that he can encompass deeper human emotions. Taking one look at television today, you can see The Truman Show was somewhat ahead of its time. It came out during a time that the genre of reality television was dominating and sapping the minds of millions. The Truman Show takes it to an exaggerated level, but manages to never be silly or trivial. The concepts are thought-provoking and its emotion is honest. His life is a parody of a conventional American dream, the kind you would see in advertising in the 50s and the 60s. However, the metaphor can go further. Truman is a free thinker who from childhood is told not to think outside the box. He is oppressed with his desire to explore and learn, which is a plot to stop him from leaving the constructed state of his existence. Perhaps The Truman Show, like American Beauty and Fight Club, is a warning. These three films reinforced me in realizing what is really important in life, and to consume, observe and listen conscientiously. It is growing ever so important as time goes on. We now enter the 21st century, looking at contemporary cinema and beyond. The films of the 2000s brings us up to our current century and proves to be a flourishing period for world cinema. The year 2000 itself was an excellent year for film. We had American Psycho, Requiem for a Dream, In the Mood for Love, Amores Perros, and many others. My favourites marking the turn of the new century are Dancer in the Dark and Memento. From controversial Danish director Lars von Trier, Dancer in the Dark is not a light watch and not an easy one to revisit. Icelandic singer Björk plays a single mother whose son suffers from a disease that will lead to the loss of his sight. Unable to afford the surgery that can help cure it, she struggles to care for her son. The musical numbers are like no other musical you'll see, and the whole film has a unique gritty texture. Von Trier's work is nihilistic, twisted and dark, and this is no exception. The second film by British director Christopher Nolan would be one of his most remarkable. I have seen the film 3 times, and each time I feel the same surprise and thought-provoking experience of my first viewing. In Memento, a man suffers from short-term memory loss, simply wants to find the man who he believes raped and murdered his wife, to kill him. To me, this film was such an eye-opener as a comment on the human condition, time, loss, and memory. It is existential as one could ask for. Memory is one of the most important things we have as humans, and it is what shapes our interaction and relation to the world and those around us. This is why memory loss, dementia, and Alzheimer's is such a tragic disorder. Memento comments on how we deal with grievance, pain, and denial. The narrative structure goes both forward and backward, just like our minds, putting you in a cerebral experience. I thought the surprise I had when exploring Korean cinema was worth giving a section to. I want to bring attention to some films that struck me. First, we will look at Bong Joon-ho's Memories of Murder. Playing with some of the conventions of a detective thriller, it has a great energy and surprise. Korea in 1986 faces its first serial killer case in history, with 2 detectives trying to find the killer. What I appreciate most in the film is how its slow pace makes us feel the struggle of the 2 detectives as they go through their gritty work together. Accompanied by lavish cinematography and a fitting soundtrack, Memories of Murder will hold you in suspense right to its last moments. A filmmaker whose work I admire is Ki-duk Kim. In 3 Iron, I think we're given one of the most honest, beautiful and original love stories in film. The romance genre ends up pitfalling by either being too serious or following the generic tropes of the romantic comedy. Here, Kim Ki-duk tells a very human tale, with a touch of fantasy. A mysterious man who breaks into people's homes while they are on holiday to stay encounters a young woman suffering from domestic abuse. Almost like a heroic rescue, our romance begins. With minimal dialogue, it is carried mainly by the great performances, lighting, camera angles and movement. While I love films with gripping dialogue, film is certainly a visual medium, and 3 Iron is a terrific example of this. The same could be said for my favourite film by Kim Ki-duk. I first watched this film when I was 16 or so and really did enjoy it and found it tranquil and memorable. When I rewatched it almost 4 years later, I was overwhelmed how much more I appreciated it. For me, it is perhaps the most calm movie experience I have ever had. Sitting in the dark late at night with no one home, I was totally absorbed by the soothing atmosphere. As a human and philosophical story, it explores the human spirit and the cycle of nature and life. As the seasons change and the years go by, so does the soul. I find it hard to describe the film, for it is one that is felt more than it is understood. If one is ever under deep stress or turmoil, I think this film is a potential cure, at least for the imagery alone. There are other films such as Old Boy worth mentioning, but we must move on. With Korean films in the 2000s, other countries began gaining more international success. France had Amélie and Rosetta, Germany had Downfall and The Lives of Others, Japan had Nobody Knows, and the ongoing success of Studio Ghibli. More and more people from America and the UK grew interest in the wonders of world cinema with more access. Which brings us then to the decade we are currently a part of. We're over halfway through, but it is worth exploring what we have seen so far in independent cinema, going places we haven't really before. More is possible with less. It is my firm belief that since the 2000s, the documentary genre has gotten better and better thanks to cheaper and less obtrusive equipment. Filmmakers such as Werner Herzog and Michael Moore were reasons for documentary's theatrical success. However, I think a recent cornerstone for documentary was with Joshua Oppenheimer's The Act of Killing. Taking over a decade to finally piece together, we are told the events that took place in Indonesia between 1965 and 1966. Almost 1 million people were murdered, being accused as communists. Oppenheimer interviews the men who were part of the death squads responsible for the deaths of thousands. Being objective in the genre is the most difficult and debated element, and with a subject like this, it is hard not to lean to one side. Oppenheimer does not openly mock, ridicule, or misrepresent these men, but lets them speak for themselves. What they say and demonstrate is enough. Without remorse or empathy, they retell how they murdered people. What makes The Act of Killing so unique is its use of absurd realism with moments of the killers recreating film scenes and murders. It enters a stage of insanity while also being horrifying. Oppenheimer also released the companion film The Look of Silence 2 years later, focusing on a man whose brother was the victim of these death squads. He then meets the people who killed his brother over 40 years ago. The Look of Silence is shorter and tells a narrower story, trying to get to the bottom of how people could carry out such acts against other people. Having seen it in the cinema with a friend, I was overwhelmingly stunned. I had not left the theatre until minutes into the credits, and it was at least another 10 before my friend and I could speak to each other. Both these films demonstrate the strength of cinema as an educating, enlightening, and human force. It is digging into the capability of evil in this world. Without learning history, we are doomed to repeat it, which is why awareness of events like this is important. We must try to prevent things like this ever happening. And we have also seen how powerful documentary can be. The film Blackfish, covering SeaWorld's lies and mistreatment of animals, literally dented their visitor count the following year. And other documentaries like Searching for Sugar Man and Amy have also proven incredibly popular and successful. Documentaries can tell us stories just as much as fiction, and can be both emotional and inspiring. I feel the form of animation has begun to show some new potential. Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks and Studio Ghibli have all made massive contributions in the past 6 years. DreamWorks not only makes beautifully rendered images, but packs in mature and engaging stories, which is what we see in films like How to Train Your Dragon. The sequel is also a pleasant surprise. While at times it falls into generic tropes, it is mostly refreshing. And with Pixar we had the release of Inside Out.
Keeping Riley happy all day long. And may I add, I love your dress, it's adorable. Oh, this whole thing, thank you so much. I love the way it twirls.
After a few years of their success dipping with Cars 2, Brave and Monsters University, they redeemed themselves. Inside Out is one of the most astonishing animated films. Adults just might find it a richer experience than children. It genuinely explores the human condition, literally looking at emotions. Pixar are always great at making iconic characters and telling stories that make us think of our childhoods, and Inside Out does this without being cheap. Disney as a whole is going through what some people are calling another Disney Renaissance, and I can't help but agree to an extent. While the films I have seen are far from masterpieces or favourites, some are audacious and full of imagination. Tangled, Wreck-It Ralph, Big Hero 6 and Zootopia are all well-written universes. And of course we have the outrageously popular Frozen, earning well over $1 billion worldwide. And again we have Studio Ghibli. While Hayao Miyazaki finally retired and the company was allegedly to close down for good, they have made some of their finest work. The Wind Rises and When Marnie Was There are beautiful movies. From their recent films, the one that stood out for me the most is The Tale of Princess Kaguya. In our age of animation, everything is CGI, and anytime I see something either stop motion or hand drawn, I have hope. Kaguya's style is very simple but elegant. Reminiscent of old oil paint drawings and traditional Japanese art, it has a realm like no other. The story is packed with emotion, and when I saw this scene I teared up instantly. It is such a touching slice of life moment. Kaguya herself plays as a metaphor for just how short life is, and not to waste time on Earth. And so with the animated genre, people are still discovering innovative and creative ways to tell stories. Now that more people are able to access animation tools, we're seeing more short films and independent work. I did not mention Don Hertzfeldt, who's a one-man band worth mentioning. His films are a little primitive in animation, but that's their charm. What else is happening in film? The style is certainly changing. We're seeing crazy amounts of CGI and reboots in Hollywood, but the independent market is making me hopeful. With smaller crews, longer takes, and camera dynamics, things are changing deeply. Let's take a look at our last handful of films that show what's happening right now.
I will keep myself hardy till freedom is opportune.
Steve McQueen made an audacious and heart-wrenching film with 12 Years a Slave. Tackling an issue that has not had much recent representation in film, he directed a film which is neither sentimental nor manipulative. Instead, we get scenes like this. Shots just hanging on the expressions of a character. It is long enough for you to realise we aren't cutting away. And we can't cut away because of the devastating emotion they're going through. The only other large significant work tackling slavery was the television show Roots in the 70s, making 12 Years a Slave a thought-provoking awareness raiser. The long take style isn't new, but more frequent. In Birdman, the film is seamlessly split together. With its soundtrack lending hand, the film has a continuous rhythm, keeping you engaged with the story and characters. And the cinematography and camera work is nothing short of masterful, like what we've seen earlier in Goodfellas. But here the shots have been cleverly edited together, with the average shots being around 10 minutes. Cinematographer Emmanuel Lubezki is a true genius of coordination. And we can see this in The Revenant. Working again with the same director, they managed to step up from what was achieved in Birdman. This time we are in 19th century America, when territorial expansion was taking place in the West. With most of the scenes taking place in the great outdoors, the camera continuously floats through the scenes. Finally earning DiCaprio an Oscar, The Revenant is an abrasive piece of work, with a story of primal levels. Survival, man against nature, and revenge make up for an exhilarating journey. Then we have films like Victoria. Clocking in at 140 minutes, it is shot entirely in one take. Aside some of its character and plot issues, this is certainly a bold move. Some have criticised this as nothing more than a gimmick. Victoria is an intriguing film, and captures a natural transition of light as the story unfolds before us. Victoria may not be a great film, but it does show what can be done. And cinema all around the world has been doing exactly that for the past few years. Amour, a devastating film about an elderly couple, with one facing a mental disorder. A separation from Iran, looking at marriage, parenthood, and urban hardship, which reaches universal messages across the globe. Son of Saul from Hungary, showing one man who's been caught up in the Holocaust, also using long takes and an interesting use of framing and aspect ratio. There is Tangerine from the United States, shot entirely on an iPhone. Wadia, the first Saudi Arabian film, and also directed by a woman. And the list could just go on and on and on, with all the inventive work that is being done around the world. Cinema has so much potential thanks to its accessibility. Now people can pick up a camera, whether it's a DSLR or a mobile phone, and tell a story. As humans, I think we can't help but tell stories. We all love telling them, and we all love listening. That may be the core fascination with the screen. Not just as a voyeuristic or educational pleasure, but as a medium that can transport you from your life, or even make you evaluate it. On my journey, there were many masterpieces and great works gone without mentioning, and especially specific filmmakers that went without being named. But what I have told you has been comprised of the work that has made me see cinema in a different light and has also pushed me further. The magic and wonders of the screen have shaped me as a person. I am a filmmaker, and these films constantly inspire me to create. Furthermore, they have made me understand this vast world with its joy, suffering, selfishness, and love. I thank you deeply for accompanying me on a look at cinema history, and I have only scratched the surface. There's so much out there, so I hope I have encouraged you to explore. Now, please excuse me. I have a movie to catch.